To tell you why I can't recommend that you buy Have a Nice Death, we need to talk about action combat and what makes it really engaging and fun, especially in the context of a roguelike game. I have been really torn on how to approach this review because the game has so much charm and the developers have created what many people find to be an amazing game. And you will see that echoed through Steam reviews and through other YouTube reviews, but sadly for me it is not a game that I can recommend. Whether or not an action roguelike is good, in my eyes comes down to three things: how responsive your character and their movement are, how much control you have over RNG when it comes to your power level and playstyle, and number three, most importantly, feeling like the combat is a reactive dance between two opponents where every decision, no matter how small or how fast you make it, really matters. So I will be reviewing Have a Nice Death through the lens of those three criteria, because that is what I feel informs how replayable and engaging the game is. This look at the game is not meant to be just contrarian because most people are really enjoying the game. It is meant to be a perspective of a long-term roguelike and character action game enjoyer, so that you can use it as a tool to figure out whether or not this game is a good buy for you, because there surely are many people who this game is good for. So kick back and enjoy a unique take on Have a Nice Death. The first thing that comes to mind when it comes to this footage is that the game looks really responsive and stylish. In this case, looks do not lie. The game is jaw-dropping and death ironically feels like heaven to control. Every button you click has an instant response and it is very clear what it does. The moveset is also very flexible with each weapon, so depending on which direction you're holding down while you're executing the attack, that uses different moves. For example, if you're holding up, your move will have some sort of a vertical interaction. And if you were in the air and you held down while you were pressing the attack button, you would probably do some sort of a ground slam. This depends from weapon to weapon, but in most cases it is incredibly intuitive. Dash and jump buttons also feel instant and reliable, and every attack feels like you are asked by the game to make a deliberate choice where you want to end up and how long you want to stand in place, in order to maximize your damage and survivability. So saying that, I can confidently say that Have a Nice Death has all the hallmarks of an amazing combat system in the toolset that it gives you to play with. The only place where the game stumbles a bit would be the timed platforming challenges, and that is because the movement is just not tight enough where you feel that you have complete control the whole time, unlike in something that is more focused on platforming like Hollow Knight for example. That is a minor gripe though, because platforming sections are short, few and far between, and definitely not the main focus of the game. And when it comes to serving combat, the movement feels amazing. The game kind of feels like a simplified version of Devil May Cry in 2D, which is something that can only be taken as a huge compliment. What feels much less good compared to the amazing fluidity of the main and secondary weapons are most spells in the game. Some of them, like the big muscly hands that clap the enemies in front of you, fulfill their fantasy perfectly, but many of the more magic-y spells like the meteor showers and the summons feel kind of floaty and like they were an afterthought because of their lack of impact comparing to the other weapons. They are definitely as strong as the physical options, but they just don't feel as good to use. So when it comes to the first criteria, you can see that this game passes it with glowing reviews. It is probably the best feeling 2D roguelike along with Dead Cells, which is such a high praise. So while I was going through the tutorial, I was ready for this game to blow my mind. I was ready to obsess over a new roguelike like Hades and play it for hours and hours. I was sure that it was gonna be the next big thing for me. Sadly, the other two factors severely let this game down, and we have to talk about them. The second criteria is all about having the control over randomness, whether it's how powerful you're gonna be that run, or having some control over what playstyle you want to play. And unlike other things in this video, this one is highly subjective. Some people love having high variance in their runs, like when playing Binding of Isaac, while some people prefer having much more control, like in Hades for example, where if you know the underlying mechanics of the game, you can manipulate the RNG to give you whatever build you want most of the time. And there lies the first big issue of the game. Depending on the weapon choice that you get, and the first ability that you get right out the gate, the game feels either garbage to play, or it feels amazing. And this is also compounded by the fact that the balancing in this game is actually pretty bad. Certain weapons and abilities are just miles and miles ahead of the other ones, and especially so in the beginning before you have a chance to upgrade them. Like one run you will need 10 minutes to get to the first boss, and in the next run you can be killing everything off screen before it can even see you. Another factor that adds to this issue is that you unlock a really big variety of weapons really fast, which means that especially early game when you have much less choice in regards to controlling the RNG, you will get stuck with using some weapons and abilities that you will not enjoy using at all. I get that this is the way for the game to make you try everything so that you can see what you like and what you don't, but as long as some of the spells and combos feel as bad as they do, and the game being as punishingly difficult as it is, those runs don't really feel like anything but wasted time, and after a while you will just start re-rolling them when you see something you don't like. Of course, you can push through and then later on use your resources to get better weapons and better spells, but since the game is pretty hard by itself, you kind of need to use those resources for healing and empowering yourself, and not for another chance to get a weapon that you will enjoy using. However, because health loss is really punishing, you are kind of incentivized to get locked into a really strong build early on. Meaning that if you get bad RNG early on, you kinda have to rely on having the good RNG later on, which shouldn't be a deciding factor in how much you enjoy playing the game. If this was the only issue with Have a Nice Death, I would end up having about 100 hours in this game at least. What ends up hurting this game the most is that combat feels like a single player experience, like your opponent is just a training dummy, and this is something that we really have to talk about. I will make a disclaimer though, this does not count for boss fights, the boss fights are absolutely amazing. Criteria number 3 is that the combat needs to feel like a dance between two opponents. No matter how expressive the moveset of Death is, if the enemies are not built for the core combat experience, the game just won't be that enjoyable to play, and that is the biggest fault of this game. If you were paying close attention to the footage in the background, you would have noticed that while I was clearing all the rooms, the optimal strategy for pretty much every single enemy type is to dash through one of their attacks and then stun them to death. This approach takes away from any interactivity that this amazing and responsive character that you're controlling could provide if the combat system wasn't based on hit stun and if the enemies were designed a bit differently. So if you take a closer look at any of the footage, you will see that all that I'm doing is I'm coming up to the enemy and then wailing at them until they die, because once I hit them once or twice, they get stunned, which means that they are opened up to be killed, and they require zero interaction from my side once I get close to them. What many of the games that get praised for their amazing combat systems do is they always give you some sort of a skill check even once you engage the enemy, so that different enemies have different strengths and weaknesses. So for some enemies it would be paramount for you to get close to them, but for some other enemies, once you get close to them, the real fight actually begins. Like in Ultra Kill, if a cleaner comes up to you, you have to run away from close spaces and find a way to hit it in the back. In Hades, if the enemy has armor, you have to respect their moves even when you get in, and then adapt on the fly. In Dead Cells, you need very specific conditions to stagger different enemies. Devil May Cry. Once you combo the Berserker, for example, you have to deal with their rage mode once they get up from the ground. What all of these games with amazing combat systems have in common, those games that you can play for hundreds of hours just because of their combat alone, is that they require real interaction for every single enemy type. The interaction that goes way beyond just dodging their first attacks and then stunning them to death. And this is all in addition to having responsive controls and the main characters with really good moveset, like in Have a Nice Death. And that is why it is so hard for me to talk about this game. Because on one side, I love how Death feels, I love the charming world, I love the boss fights, I love how much variety there is with all the different playstyles that you can play, but on the other side, playing alone in a level with a training dummy would probably be as fun as most enemies are in this game. Considering that character action games are some of my favorite games ever, this game feels like the biggest unfulfilled potential that I have seen recently, and I hate that I have to go against recommending it. Well, thank you for making it to the end of the video. I put a lot of effort into making this as unique as possible, so if you are an enjoyer of deep dives into what makes games special through reviews, make sure that you check out my Ultra Kill review, and a like and a sub would be really appreciated. Thank you very much for watching. My name has been Essential, and I'll see you next time.